The Valley of St. Harlow was the sort of place where winter seemed to linger longer than anywhere else. Snow clung to rooftops like a memory that refused to melt, and the wind carried with it a hush, as though the land itself preserved secrets. The villagers were simple people, shaped by hard seasons and quiet work. Their days passed in routines, tending livestock, mending tools, gathering around small hearth fires at night. Nothing ever truly changed there. People were born, lived, and died within the valley's boundaries, and life continued as predictably as the turning of the seasons. That is why the arrival of a stranger was something the town would remember forever. He came near sundown, when the last sliver of light stretched long shadows across the frozen ground. He introduced himself as Dr. Alistair Venn, a physician trained far from their rough settlement. He was well-dressed, too well perhaps, dark wool coat, clean gloves, hair combed back with meticulous care. His posture was refined, his movements quiet and unhurried. But it was his eyes that unsettled those who bothered to notice. Calm, observant, as though he was always studying people rather than speaking to them. Yet he brought medicine, real medicine, not folk cures or herbal luck, so the villagers welcomed him. They invited him to dine in their homes, offered him a room near the church, and soon treated him as a blessing. He cured fevers that had killed before. He stitched deep gashes with steady hands. Mothers wept with relief when ailing children began to recover under his care. He worked in silence mostly, with a soft voice and a gentle touch. There was no arrogance in him, no cruelty visible, only precision. Still, there were things about him that did not fit the warmth they offered. Villagers sometimes saw him walking the cemetery long after midnight, staring at the stone markers as though waiting for someone to rise. Children spoke of glimpsing him beyond the tree line, kneeling in the snow, arranging small bones in patterns they did not understand. When asked, he only smiled faintly and said it was to better know the nature of life. But people are willing to ignore many things when a person is useful to them. So the murmurs stayed whispers. The long stares were shrugged off, and the cold hours he spent among the dead were dismissed as the habits of a scholarly man, someone touched by sorrow or devotion, anything but the other possibility. Because at that time, no one in St. Harlow could imagine that the quiet doctor who saved lives had also come to learn how to take them. Winter settled deeper over St. Harlow until the landscape became a pale, breathless world of white. Smoke curled from chimney tops, livestock huddled in barns, and people traveled only when necessary. It was during this season of isolation that the valley first felt something was wrong. It began quietly, almost without notice, when a hunter failed to return from the woods. At first, no one worried. Hunters often slept outdoors near their traps, but the next day came and went, and then another. His dog returned alone, whimpering and thin, fur stiff with frost. The villagers searched as far as the snowfall allowed, calling his name into the cold stillness. No marks of struggle, no trail of blood, no broken branches, just untouched snow, as if the man had stepped off the world itself. Not long after, a carpenter disappeared. He was last seen walking home after repairing the church door. His footprints trailed down the main road, then veered toward the tree line and simply stopped. The snow beyond was unbroken, pristine, as if nothing living had crossed it. The searchers stood in silence, staring at the impossible sight. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered that perhaps the forest had begun swallowing people. The whispers grew, traveling faster than the wind. The third disappearance struck the village at its heart. A young girl, no more than 9. She had gone to fetch water from the well near the church. The bucket lay beside the well, frozen to the ground. The child, however, was gone. Her mother's screams echoed across the valley that night, reaching into every home, pulling at every heart. Doors were barred, windows locked. Candles burned until they wept wax onto tables. Fear had taken root. Not of wolves or wild animals. Those left tracks. Everyone knew this was something else. Something human. Dr. Venn moved among them during this time, offering words of comfort with a calm, steady tone. He visited the grieving homes, laid a hand on trembling shoulders, prepared tinctures for sleep that rarely worked. His presence soothed people, not because he eased their sorrow, but because he seemed to understand it so well. And yet, there was something strange in how he spoke. When asked what he thought had happened, he did not mention wolves or bandits. Instead, he would murmur, almost thoughtfully, "Some people do not vanish. They are simply taken back." No one understood what he meant, but no one asked him to explain. There are questions people avoid when they are afraid of the answers. And so the villagers clung to their routines, their prayers, their fires, anything that made them feel anchored to the world. Still, every night felt a little colder. Every distant sound seemed sharper. The valley had grown quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. But the silence was only the beginning. Father Renwick had always been a cautious man. He was neither young nor old, neither stern nor overly kind. He lived simply, devoted to his parish and to the quiet rhythm of St. Harlow. Yet something about Dr. Venn unsettled him in ways he could not explain, not at first. The doctor prayed, attended sermons, spoke respectfully, even donated to the poor. But there was a stillness in him that felt studied, as if every word he spoke, every movement he made, was chosen after careful observation. Renwick often found the doctor watching people instead of speaking to them, his expression unreadable, his eyes following suffering the way a scholar might follow an interesting text. The first ripple of doubt began the night Father Renwick overheard two elders whispering that the doctor had once lived in a university town overseas, but had left under dark rumor. Renwick dismissed it at the time. Gossip traveled easily and truth rarely kept pace. But the unease lingered like a splinter beneath the skin. When the disappearances began, that splinter drove deeper. The doctor's calmness through the tragedy was too smooth, too composed. He did not react like a man grieving with the town. He reacted like a man watching grief, studying it, measuring it. One evening, unable to silence his thoughts, Father Renwick lit a single candle and went to the small archive room beneath the church. The records were old, copied letters and crumbling documents that described the few learned men who came to the colonies. He sifted through the papers by candlelight for hours, and eventually, he found something, Venn's name, written in a letter from the old world. It mentioned his expulsion from a medical guild for anatomical inquiry performed without consent. The phrasing was vague, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. It spoke of practices done not on bodies meant for study, but on bodies that had once still breathed. Renwick sat in the flickering light a long time, the air growing colder around him as though the knowledge itself carried frost. The next night, when Father Renwick saw Dr. Venn walking toward the cemetery with a lantern in hand, he followed. He moved carefully, keeping distance, letting the darkness swallow his footsteps. The churchyard was quiet, only the wind stirring the dead grass and the snow crunching under the doctor's boots. Venn did not go to any grave, but instead walked behind the chapel to a place where the stone slabs were uneven. There, with practiced ease, he lifted a chunk of stone revealing a dark opening, an entrance hidden beneath the church. Father Renwick's breath caught, though he made no sound. He watched Venn descend, lantern disappearing into the earth below. After several moments, faint sounds rose from the hidden room, soft, muffled sobbing or pleading, the scrape of metal, something shifting wetly. Renwick's blood ran cold, terror rooting him to the spot. He did not dare move closer, nor call out. His faith, strong as it had been all his life, bent beneath a sudden crushing realization. Evil did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it was polite. He slipped away and walked back to the rectory with slow, rigid steps. He did not sleep. He sat awake, the candle burning low, the shadows in the room seeming to inch closer. He wanted to tell someone, anyone, but he knew he would not be believed. The town needed the doctor. They needed his medicines, his knowledge, his steady hand. To accuse him without proof would be to turn the town against their own protector. And so Father Renwick remained silent, not out of cowardice alone, but out of a terrible uncertainty. If the town lost the doctor before they understood what he was, how many more would vanish before they saw the truth? The silence he chose that night would cost the Valley dearly. Dr. Venn had always believed that the body was not simply flesh, but a vessel carrying secrets. This idea had taken root in him long before he came to St. Harlow, back when he was a young student in the old world. While his peers studied to save lives, he studied to understand them. He believed that pain stripped away lies, that beneath suffering, every person revealed their truest self. He watched patients in their final moments the way others watched sunsets or music performances, with quiet fascination and reverence. Death was not an end to him, but a revelation, a moment when the human soul stood naked. His colleagues had noticed something wrong, but slowly, they saw how calm he was when a patient died on the table, how he leaned closer when someone cried out, as if listening for something only he could hear. They saw how his hands trembled not with fear, but anticipation. And then came the day he went too far, using a living subject where a corpse should have been. It was then that the guild expelled him, calling his practices monstrous. But to Venn, they were simply incomplete minds, afraid to look at truth. The journal he kept was meticulously written, each line clean and precise. There were no stains, no frantic scribbles, nothing that suggested madness. His mind was orderly, organized, thoughtful. In those pages he explained, not with rage but with certainty, the flesh lies, the face lies. But in the moment a life ends, the truth is unmasked. Pain is only the key. He believed he did not kill out of cruelty. He told himself he killed for knowledge, for a deeper understanding of what humans were beneath the surface they presented. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush or revel in violence. He treated his chosen victims as one might treat a delicate experiment, speaking to them gently, calming them, assuring them that he only wished to know them fully. He spoke to them the way a doctor comforts a patient before surgery. His tone soft, his hands steady, his breath even. And all the while, his eyes watched every flicker of fear, every tightening of muscle, every whispered plea. He believed that in their terror, in their final clarity, they revealed something pure, something unfiltered, something honest. That calmness made him more frightening than any beast or murderer driven by rage. There was no passion in him that could burn out, no madness that could collapse under its own weight. His mind was clear, steady, and convinced. He didn't see himself as evil. He saw himself as a seeker of truth, a scholar of the human soul, a monster who did not know he was a monster at all. And in that lie, nestled deep within his certainty, was the most horrifying truth of all. The storm arrived with a violence that felt almost biblical. Winds howled through St. Harlow like wolves circling prey, tearing shingles from rooftops and rattling every window pane in town. Snow fell so thick it blurred the world into a pale, shifting haze. People stayed inside, praying the storm would pass without taking livestock homes or lives. But the storm had come for something else. Lightning struck the church steeple, splintering wood and sending burning fragments crashing through the roof. The villagers rushed through the blizzard to save the holy building, pulling buckets of snow and water, shouting over the roar of the wind. The church floor was slick with melted ice, smoke, and chaos. And then in the confusion, someone noticed that the floor near the altar, the mosaic tiles, had cracked open. The weight of debris had revealed something that should never have been found. A trapdoor, ancient and worn, hidden beneath layers of stone. There was no discussion, no decision. Fear guided them. They pried it open, and a cold, stale breath of air drifted out as though the earth itself exhaled. Torches were lit, though the flames quivered wildly in the storm wind that still pushed through broken windows. One by one, they descended the narrow, damp steps into darkness. The room below was larger than anyone could have imagined. The walls were stone cold and sweating with moisture, and the floor was packed earth darkened with stains. The villagers saw tables arranged with surgical precision, smooth planks polished from use, shackles bolted into the walls, metal tools laid out in perfect order, saws, scalpels, knives, clamps. Everything was clean, maintained, cared for. Not the lair of a madman, but the workshop of someone meticulous. Then they saw the rest. Shelves lined the walls, and upon them sat jars sealed with wax. Inside each jar was something once living, pieces of bodies preserved in clear fluid, labeled with careful handwriting, fingers, eyes, a jawbone, a heart still red beneath the glass. Not trophies, specimens, as if they belonged to some quiet collection meant to be studied and catalogued. A few villagers began to cry, others stepped back in horror. One man fell to his knees, choking on disbelief. In the center of the room, illuminated by the wavering torchlight, stood Dr. Alistair Venn. He did not appear surprised to see them. He did not tremble, or run, or deny what surrounded him. Sight. He simply looked at them the way he looked at everything, with quiet consideration. His coat was perfectly clean. His hands were folded behind his back. There was no madness in his expression, only disappointment, as though they had interrupted something important. Something important. "You came too soon," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "I am not finished." The words struck the villagers harder than any scream could have. For a moment, just a moment, no one moved. Their fear froze them, made them feel like children caught in a nightmare made real. But then the spell broke. Shouts rose. Someone lunged forward. Others followed. The doctor did not resist. He did not fight. He allowed himself to be taken as though he had expected it all along. Perhaps he had. Perhaps in his mind, discovery was simply the next chapter of understanding. When they dragged him into the storm, the valley howled around them, snow swirling like ghosts in the air. And yet, through the wind and the chaos, Dr. Venn remained composed, almost serene, as if the world finally saw him clearly, and he saw no reason to hide anymore. The execution was carried out in the town square at dawn, when the sky was still a pale, muted gray and frost clung to every surface. The villagers gathered not out of hatred, but out of necessity. The way one watches the burning of a diseased field, not for spectacle, but to ensure the sickness does not return. Dr. Venn stood at the center, bound but unbroken. He looked neither afraid nor angry. If anything, he appeared contemplative, as though he were observing the moment from outside his own body, studying the way people responded to justice, grief, and fear. When the final blow was delivered, he did not cry out or struggle. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. After his death, there was no celebration, no cheers, only a heavy, suffocating quiet. The bodies and remains found in the underground chamber were buried in a single consecrated grave, for no one could identify them anymore. Not entirely. The church elders ordered the chamber sealed, but the villagers insisted it be burned instead. The fire roared for hours, rising so high the flames licked the steeple. Smoke poured from the chapel windows and drifted through the valley like a dark curtain. Yet some believed that fire could not cleanse what had been done there. They said knowledge, once awakened, never fully dies. Time passed, and St. Harlow tried to return to its old rhythms, but something in the town had changed, something that could not be named. The laughter of children sounded quieter. Families locked their doors, even when there was no reason to. People looked at one another a second longer, as if searching for some hidden terrible truth behind familiar faces. The valley still held its mist, its quiet winters, its slow-turning seasons, but innocence had drained from it, leaving behind a stillness that no prayer could undo. Years turned into decades. The story of Dr. Venn became a whisper, then a warning told to children to keep them away from the woods or to quiet them at night. But stories have a way of surviving, even when no one speaks them aloud. Travelers passing through claimed to feel watched near the old church grounds. Some said they heard footsteps in the cemetery at night, slow and measured. as though someone were studying the living from just beyond the edge of sight. Others swore they saw a figure standing among the graves during fog-heavy dawns, a tall silhouette, still and silent, head tilted slightly as if listening. The townsfolk dismissed these accounts, but always with a nervous laugh, never meeting each other's eyes. Because deep down, they knew that some presences do not fade simply because a body is laid to rest. They linger in the memory of a place, in the corners of silence, in the spaces where fear once lived. And when the mist thickens in St. Harlow, when the valley grows quiet in just the right way, there are those who swear that something is still there, watching patiently, waiting to learn more. As if the pursuit of truth never ended, as if Dr. Venn never really left at all.